Welcome to Crime Stoppers, presented by Main Street Bank, a production of WTRF-7, Love OV, and Crime Stoppers Upper Ohio Valley. I'm Nick Nash, your host, alongside Katie Richardson. And we wanted to jump on today and do a quick episode, kind of recapping a few things that we've covered over the last few months and a few new true crime stories that have happened both on the local and national level that we wanted to bring up and just kind of discuss a little bit. So Katie, thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome.
Real quick, I want to jump back to, we are 4 months into doing the Crime Stoppers show. We've covered a number of different things, and I kind of wanted to provide what updates, if any, we have on some of the cases that we've talked about, going back to our first case, which was the murder of Kyle Morgan here in Wheeling. Now, unfortunately, there has not been a whole lot of movement on this one. This happened a number of years ago. Kyle, just as a recap, Kyle was found, he's 15 years old, found murdered under the Fort Henry Bridge in Wheeling. Not a whole lot of leads on this. We've spent a lot of time talking with Wheeling Police Department, particularly Sergeant Seyfried with the Wheeling Police Department. And there's just not a whole lot of information. And that was one of the things we talked a lot about when we were covering this case was there are no witnesses to this, at least not that we know of, which I think we've talked about is very, very hard to believe. I still believe that somebody knows something about this, and that can be said about most of the cases that we talk about. In fact, most crimes in general, somebody knows something about this, they're just not talking. So again, that all goes back to our purpose here with the Crime Stoppers show is to promote the Crime Stoppers Upper Ohio Valley tip line, which is 1-877-TIPS for us. That's 1-877-TIPS, the number 4 US. So again, just as a precursor to what we're talking about today, if anybody has any information about not just Kyle, but any case in the Upper Ohio Valley, you can call that number, share your information. You can do it 100% anonymously.
So go back and watch our original episodes about the Kyle Morgan case because we'll give you really specifics in there. But with this case, no witnesses, but we know a time period. He was dropped off at a bus station in Wheeling. We know about what time, and we know what time the body was found the next morning. So while it is a fairly large amount of time, it was in Wheeling. Someone saw something.
It was in Wheeling, and it wasn't necessarily in crazy hours of the night because it was around 5, 6 o'clock that he was dropped off at the bus station. So something happened over the course of, 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 hours that there's just a blank in our information. We don't have any information on what happened there. And I think if we knew something about what happened in those hours, we would have a better idea of what happened to Kyle. When we spoke with the Wheeling Police Department about this, there was some discussion about some people that may have been there or have heard what happened at that time. Now, the place where Kyle's body was found was a well-known area among the local homeless population. Some people slept down there, they kind of halfway lived down there, there was a place to do drugs, drink, whatever. So there was a population that was hanging out in that area, so it leads me to believe that somebody was there when it happened, more than likely. I think if we're going to make assumptions about that, I think we can assume that somebody was probably in that area around that time. I know for a fact that there was an individual that was questioned in this case that was either there when it happened or had firsthand knowledge of what went down that night. That person was under investigation from the Wheeling Police Department. I don't have a name, that's why I'm saying that person. I don't know this individual's name. However, that individual is now deceased. That individual committed suicide not long after the investigation started and was being questioned by police. Now, we can take that in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different ways to assume. I hate to make assumptions, but we do know that the person that was being questioned committed suicide not long after being questioned. So, take that information for however you want. Moving on to the Brian Goff and Joni Davis case. This was another very, very interesting one. For me, it was fairly recent. Just a quick recap, Brian Goff and Joni Davis were an older couple that went missing. we talked a lot about the routine, very set in the routine. They left the restaurant that they went to every Sunday and disappeared on their way home. The last people to see them or have contact with them was Brian's brother and his girlfriend at the time. Their phone last pinged near the Rush Run Road area, which is where Brian's brother's girlfriend resided. There was a lot of discussion about this one because it was such a strange case. And I think, in my opinion, of all of the cases that we've covered on this show, this one I feel as close to 100% sure as I can that somebody knows something about this one. Somebody has firsthand information about what happened to them and they're not talking. The reason, well, one of the many reasons that I believe this is we received a message through Crime Stoppers. And I won't go into the total details on this for various reasons, but it was basically saying, stop talking about this. And that was odd. We didn't bring that up at the time because it was clearly an intimidation tactic. There was no follow-up on it. We don't know who sent it. It may have been a joke or a prank or whatever. I'm not concerned about it. But that led me to believe that somebody wanted us to stop talking about that. Of course, we didn't. I wanted to bring that up because it leads me to believe more that there is a lot more information about that case out there than most others. I think of all the cases we've covered, I think that one is the most solvable.
And that was one that we got a lot of people to come on camera and talk about too. We got to hear from the Belmont County Sheriff's Department. You got to hear from the FBI and also families for both Brian and Joni. So we had a lot of different angles for it. And it's a case where you do know a lot about their routine. Really helps set the stage for where they were, where they should have been, things like that. But this case was interesting too because they have literally disappeared. There is no evidence as to what happened anyway. There's just nothing, which how many times did you and I say to each other, they were in a car. We said, how do you hide a car?
How do you hide a car? And I talked with the FBI agent in Ohio that's working in Belmont County on this one. And I asked the question, can you make a car disappear? You see it in movies a lot, right?
Yeah, sure.
You know, you got I think of the show Breaking Bad, you've got a drug vehicle that you want to make disappear. You take it to a scrapyard and you got a guy that says, no questions asked, $50, I'll make it disappear. I asked him point blank, is that a real thing? Does that happen? And he said, I've never really encountered it myself, but yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah.
I think it's possible. So I think there are a lot of different possibilities to what happened with them. Again, I don't want to speculate one way or the other. We heard a lot of different sides of the stories with the families, but I think there's a lot of information out there that we just don't know. But I think of all the cases that we've covered on this show, that is by far, in my opinion, the most solvable.
Yeah, and anything helps. That's the whole point of why we're here, is that any tip you have, any tip you heard, literally anything having to do with any of these cases, or even things we haven't talked about yet or are going to talk about, anything like that, calling the tip line could change everything.
Yep. And going from what I think is the most solvable case that we've covered to what I think is probably the least solvable case that we've covered is in Harrison County in the Mahalco case. The reason being, the majority of the reason being, it happened in 1978.
Right.
We're dealing with a case that's 40 plus years old, and there's just no information about it. You go back to 1978 in rural Harrison County, not a whole lot of people around to begin with. Quick background on this, the Mahalcos were an elderly couple that ran a bar, the Melody Inn Tavern, outside of Caddis, and somebody broke into the apartment that they lived in was connected to the bar. Somebody broke in, robbed the bar, killed both of these people in the middle of the night, and disappeared. I mean, they got away with what they think is a couple of $1,000 in cash. Not a whole lot of money, not enough to kill two people over, in my opinion. But I feel sure that it was a local. I feel sure that it was somebody that had been in the bar, somebody that was possibly a regular at the bar, but there's no evidence to say that one way or the other. I know there was at least at one time a suspect in this case who was all of those things, a local resident, worked at the coal mine down the street, hung out at the bar, and was known to be involved in a lot of other crimes over the years. But again, so much time has passed. I know Harrison County is still actively investigating this one, and I hope for the sake of the family, I know that the Mahalka's daughter is still heavily involved in this one. I hope for the sake of the family, they do find some closure on that one. But being such an old case and being so little information on it, it's tough to solve that one.
And when we met with the Harrison County Sheriff and the deputy, we were there for several hours. We talked about the case before we even started an interview. It was just a very interesting, we approached that case totally different than we did the others. We got a lot of information beforehand.
We had a very different approach to that case. And the reason being, sometimes when we're doing our show and we're researching these things, because these things are active investigations, law enforcement doesn't want to give all of the information. And that's not necessarily because they don't want us to know things or they don't want the public to know things, but anytime it's an active investigation, you don't want to give out too much because you run the risk of false leads. You run the risk of people talking too much about the wrong things. You run the risk of having somebody come forward with information that may be completely unrelated and they need a reason to be able to verify those things. So when we spoke with Harrison County, I think they were new to the whole process of having somebody come and ask a lot of questions. And our process has always been, tell us what you want the public to know. Give us as much as you can. I understand that there are going to be things that you don't want to give up. But when we met with them, it was a very good conversation. And of course, these things are fascinating to us and to the viewer as well. So we had a really interesting conversation, which you said, I think we were there 2 or 3 hours talking with them about that one.
And with it being 40 years ago, still the case file, which Nick read, I did not. That was a little too much for me.
I did.
But it was in a 3-inch binder. So even though, and one thing that they mentioned from the start was the crime scene technology that is used nowadays was not even invented back then, so that's a hindrance, but still, case file 3 inches thick.
It was remarkable the amount of information they had on this case. Like you said, it was a 3-inch thick binder that had information from witnesses at that time. It had all of the crime scene photos, all of the crime scene investigation stuff, statements from the police department at that time, who are mostly either now retired or no longer with us. Given that it was such a long time ago, there was a remarkable amount of information on that. Unfortunately, it remains unsolved.
But it's enough information that we did a couple episodes on it because we can jog someone's memory.
Absolutely, and that's kind of the big thing is being able to have this information out there after all that time. It's possible that somebody never even really knew that the investigation was taking part, or they saw it happen and they thought it was solved and never heard any more about it. It's just trying to keep the information fresh in the eyes of you, the viewer. That one was tough for me. Reading about it, because I think it was because they were so old, and I hate to say that,
well liked, and
I mean, these were grandparents.
Not that the rest of our
parents and grandparents,
weren't,
and you see the information and how it went. It was a pretty grisly crime scene, and that was very difficult. I feel so bad for the family in that case, because I just hope that they're able to close that one and find some information on it. It's a tough one. Moving on to, we talked a little bit about the behind the scenes, how we talk with law enforcement, with people involved. Some people have asked me since we've been doing the show, what's it like to build this show? What's your process like? So I thought I'd kind of give a little behind the scenes. Unfortunately, I will say this, with most television shows, with most web shows, with most things that we do, the behind the scenes is not always as fun or glamorous or interesting maybe as you might think it is. So I don't want to crush anybody's vision of what we do and how we do it. But We spend a lot of time researching. We speak a lot with the law enforcement that's involved with certain cases. We've worked closely with the Wheeling Police Department, with the Belmont County Sheriff's Department, and in that last case with the Harrison County Sheriff's Department. We spend a lot of time talking with the investigators. I like to speak with not just the chief of police or the sheriff, but with the individual investigator that's in charge, the detective or whoever it might be, and get a feel for what the story was like when it happened. Now, with the Mihalkos, we don't have any of those people because nobody that was there at that time is with the department now. So it's been passed on from detective to detective over the years, and they still have very good information. But like with the Kyle Morgan case, Sergeant Seyfried was involved from very, very early in the investigation. So it's good to have that perspective of what he saw, what he observed during that time. And I think that's important because I'm not a detective, I'm not an investigator, I'm just somebody that is collecting information and passing it on to the public. So I tend to see things a little bit differently, and as I always say, it's good to have a second set of eyes on things. And it leads me to ask a lot more questions. My biggest thing is just asking questions, not necessarily the same ones over and over, but new questions, new perspectives. Try to find that little spark of maybe let's take this in a different direction. I bring up Kyle Morgan because that was a case where we went down a lot of different rabbit holes. We went through a lot of different scenarios and tried to piece together what happened that night, why somebody would kill a 15-year-old in Wheeling, why he was under the bridge, like why did all of these things happen and how did he get there? And there were so many questions, so many things that we just could not find answers to. And we even did our little road trip on that one too, to go check out the area where his body was found and figure out how did he get there. The biggest thing was we could not put Kyle under that bridge. We couldn't find any reason why he would be under that bridge, any legitimate reason. And unfortunately, when you can't find a reason for those things, you begin to stretch. You begin to speculate. And that's dangerous too.
Right.
But going back to how we do things and what our process is, it's different for every case. And it starts with meeting with law enforcement and getting their perspective on things, and then reaching out to family members and finding old news stories and going through every little detail that we can within the constraints of our schedule for the show.
Yes, and we both have other jobs. This is our second job. It is time consuming, but it's interesting. We've enjoyed. Can you enjoy it?
You can enjoy. I think we can enjoy it. We enjoy doing it because I think at the core of it, we want to try to solve these cases. There's so many open investigations and even cold cases that are not even being actively researched in this area. There's tons of them, even just small crimes, but there are a ton of things that we just don't have information on. And if we can do any little thing on this show that jogs somebody's memory and finds a few answers, even if it's a small one, we're happy to do that.
One thing from the beginning, though, me as the video background, I had to kind of put my foot down from the beginning and say this is not Dateline. With the Kyle Morgan case and with Brian Goff and Joni Davis, like Nick said, recent enough that we work for a television station and we had some video to use. But the Mihalko murders, so long ago that there was nothing to use. And even then, when we do a 10-minute episode on a case, I don't have 10 minutes of video. So we're still figuring things out. We're still figuring out how to structure it where we're keeping our viewers interested and, still doing what we can to get information out of them without being like, you're going to see this on Dateline or
Right.
48 Hours or any of those shows.
Who knows, maybe someday.
Right.
And I will mention, you mentioned having the resources of WTRF, older news stories, write-ups, things like that. I want to mention that there have been many times that we've gone into the newsroom and talked with WTRF News Director Brenda Danehart and DK Wright, who has been with WTRF for many years and has both a close personal interest and professional interest in local unsolved crime. She's been covering these things for years, and both of them have been just an amazing wealth of information and resource too. Before we wrap things up today, I want to bring up just a few true crime stories, both local and national, that have been in the news. These aren't heavily researched on our end. I just want to bring them up because if you're watching the show right now, you probably had an interest in some of these things. And the first
And
thing,
our whole point is to get tips
Right.
for crime. So
Right. And the first one is something that I don't want to dive too much in because it is a very, very hot and active investigation in Belmont County, and that was the two individuals that were found dead in their home during a house fire in Belmont County. Again, this one is very sensitive because it is extremely active, and I know police have a lot of resources into this one. But I wanted to bring it up because it is a local story and it is currently unsolved, and that's basically what we do. But this is a very sad and very interesting story that happened. What police know right now, you'll have to read, their press conferences and let them tell you exactly what they know and what they don't know. But what is, I believe, confirmed is that these two individuals were murdered. It was considered a double homicide and an arson as well. The house was set on fire. One of the deceased was a local business owner, and it was his wife along with him. It's a puzzling case, and I know there have been a few different leads that have come with this. I know there were a couple of individuals arrested for something that was possibly unrelated to the murder, but I don't know if that's 100% confirmed. But I'll tell you, that's basically all we can say about this one at this point. But we are keeping an eye on it, and we'll be talking with Belmont County Sheriff's Department on this and just trying to offer any resources that we have to help solve that
And
one.
the Crime Stoppers tip line is for anything.
Absolutely.
So these, the old cases, this most recent case, call the tip line.
Yeah, absolutely. And just because we're not covering something in depth, or it's not our focus episode, or it's not our focus case, you can absolutely call the tip line for anything that's happened up and down the Ohio Valley. Going national, one of the big stories that's been really hot in the national news over the last couple of weeks is the young woman named Gabby Petito. Basically, the story is her and her boyfriend were traveling out west in a kind of a camper van, converted van. That was something they did. There was an incident where police were called while they were traveling. They were having a disagreement, and apparently it was resolved, or at least thought resolved at the time. There was some video of that. If it's online, you can find that. Police left. Not long after, the boyfriend, Brian was his name, ends up back home in Florida with the van, but Gabby's nowhere to be found. Fast forward a few days, and they find her body not far from where the initial incident happened. I don't want to speculate on this case. There's a lot of speculation on this one, but Brian is now missing. He was supposedly recently seen on the Appalachian Trail, I believe in the North Carolina area.
Which the Appalachian Trail runs through West Virginia.
It does.
So.
Very little piece of it.
Still.
Over in the Panhandle. But his family is giving one story. Gabby's family is giving another story. It's a very, very messy case, but it's very interesting too. And because it's not a local case, we're not digging too far into it. But I wanted to bring it up because I know a lot of viewers are probably interested in that one. And Katie, I come bursting into your office yesterday because I was so excited about this. I saw the headline that we've uncovered the Zodiac Killer, and we know who he is
Right.
after 50, 60 years. doing a little more digging and research into this.
Reading more than just the headline.
Reading more than just the headline, and we should know better.
Yes.
I'm not sold on this one. So basically, the story goes: a group by the name of Code Breakers, Code Crackers, Case Crackers. It's not Crime Stoppers.
No, it is not.
That's us. Determined that they found a solution to the final Zodiac message. If you're not familiar with the Zodiac Killer, go read the Wikipedia page or watch the movie Zodiac, which is a fantastic and pretty faithful retelling of the story. This guy's been on the run, we think, since the 60s.
Yeah.
Killed 5 or 6 people in the San Francisco area. And it's always been a big mystery. I always thought the Zodiac case was one that would never go solved.
Right.
I thought this guy was gone. This group believes that they've cracked the code. They know who he is. They named an individual.
Of course, he is deceased.
It died in 2018.
Right.
But I'm not convinced. And the reason I say that is I'm not saying they didn't find the right guy. The evidence that they're presenting is pretty shaky. It's
right.
shaky at best. They determined that the photo of the guy that they have has a scar on his forehead that
right.
matches the scar that was in the police sketch from the 60s, which, okay, it's shaky at
right.
best. And the other information was that his name was somehow hidden in the Zodiac thing, but they didn't really explain why or how. So yeah, I came into today's show just ready to talk about that one. It was exciting to see, and we're seeing a lot of these old serial killer cases being solved right now. You have the Golden State Killer
right.
that was just found just a few years ago due to DNA evidence, and I think that stuff is getting so good that they're able to make these connections. So I don't want to jump on and say, yeah, we found Zodiac, but I think maybe they're getting close. I think there's some new information that's coming out. I just don't think we're there yet.
I think it has been interesting in our experience with this show to work with law enforcement, because in my TV career, I always did sports. So I didn't really, I was never in news. I didn't work with law enforcement that closely. This is probably as close as I have ever worked with them. And they just know what they're doing, and they have resources, and it is what they do for their jobs. So anytime you have a group of people who call themselves independent investigators. And in the article he sent me about this, I read at the very end, it said, this group is asking police to test blood, like they haven't already done that. It's just, the funny thing is our show is based on helping the police with giving tips, but we are not a group of investigators that are sitting there saying, this scar on this photo matches that scar on a police sketch from 1968.
Right, and I'm all for having independent investigators look at things and maybe try to find some new information, because in a lot of ways that's what we do. But it's not our, like I've said a million times on the show, it's not our job to solve the crime. It's our job to maybe try to pull some new information and pass that on to law enforcement. Another thing with the Zodiac thing, this group found a connection, they think, to another murder case that wasn't originally attributed to Zodiac, and they brought it to police, and police said, no, we have a lot of evidence and reasons why those aren't connected. So I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic that maybe that there's some information out there, but I don't want to jump on and say, yeah, they've closed the case. I don't know if we've got our guy.
At the end of the article you sent me, the San Francisco Police Department said this case is still open.
Yep.
So and with something as famous as the Zodiac Killer, I'd have to do some more research, but I think you can assume that like FBI got involved, more.
Oh, sure.
With a entity with even more resources, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to be the skeptical one.
That's all we got for you guys today. Thanks for tuning in. Crime Stoppers, of course, presented by Main Street Bank. I want to thank them for all the support we've had over the months. Main Street Bank has been a great sponsor and a great partner. We're a production of WTRF7, Love OV, and Crime Stoppers Upper Ohio Valley. Again, if you ever have any information on a local crime, you can submit anonymously at the tip line, 1-877-TIPS for us. That's 877-TIPS, the number 4 US.